The rain hammered at the casement windows, rattling the glass in its leaded frame. But within the drawing room of the Ashcombe London townhouse all was subdued and stately. The Marquis, Lord Sebastian Ashcombe, paced the Turkish rug with the measured grace of a man accustomed to being watched. Only now he was not performing for the Tun or Parliament, but for the woman seated opposite, Miss Charlotte Redmayne. Her hands folded neatly in her lap, her posture as erect and unbending as her expression was wary. She was not what he had expected. He had imagined, he realized with a twinge of discomfort, someone meeker, grateful, perhaps even a little cowed by the grandeur of the place. Miss Redmayne took in the gilt-framed portraits, the marble mantel, the crystal decanter untouched on the sideboard, with cool appraisal. If she was impressed, she did not show it. "You understand the nature of the arrangement," he said, pausing before her. He smoothed his cuffs, careful as always, though she caught the faintest tremor in the movement. Charlotte's gaze was direct, her eyes a clear, steady grey beneath dark brows. "I understand you wish me to play the part of your betrothed for the duration of a house party at your family estate. 1 week, no more. I am to be charming, attentive, and above all, convincing." He inclined his head, not quite a nod. "In exchange, you will receive the sum we agreed, and my assurance that once our bargain concludes, you will have no further trouble from me or mine." She considered this, fingers toying with a loose strand of hair. "And if your family or your guests prove less easily managed? What if someone suspects?" His lips twitched, almost a smile. "I rather hoped you would find that a challenge, Miss Redmayne. You came highly recommended from Mrs. Brewster." Charlotte's chin lifted at the mention of her former employer, a woman of formidable discretion. "I'm not an actress, my lord," she said. "But I have endured enough drawing rooms to know the value of keeping one's wits. Still," she hesitated, a flash of something like fear in her eyes, quickly swallowed. "You must know, I am not without pride. If the situation becomes intolerable, I will not hesitate to extricate myself." Sebastian studied her. She wore a gown of plain but serviceable blue, neat gloves, and a hat, now resting on her lap, trimmed with faded velvet. She was not beautiful in the conventional sense, but there was something in her bearing, a quiet confidence that unsettled him. "I have no wish to make you uncomfortable," he said, almost gently. "But I require someone who can withstand scrutiny. My uncle, his lordship, is not a sentimental man. He must believe the engagement genuine, or the inheritance reverts to my cousin. The rest of my family, well, you will meet them soon enough." Charlotte smiled, quick and wry. "You speak as though you're hiring me for a dangerous expedition, my lord. Is your family so very fearsome?" He allowed himself a short laugh, though there was little mirth in it. "They can be. My mother is a woman of strong opinions. My cousin Timothy is cleverer than most children twice his age. And Lady Araminta, she is not family, but you will find her in every room." She filed the names away, her manner brisker now. "And what, precisely, do you expect of me? Beyond smiles and amiable conversation, am I to allow you to court me, to accept your arm, your attentions?" There was a faint color in his cheeks, but his voice was steady. "Within reason, yes. The engagement must appear plausible. There will be moments, dinners, walks, perhaps a dance or two, when we must perform for an audience. But I will not ask of you anything that would compromise your reputation. I give you my word." She considered this, then set her hat on the table with a decisive gesture. "Very well. But I set one condition of my own." He arched an eyebrow, surprised, and he realized, interested. "Name it." "If I am to play this part, I wish to be treated as an equal partner in the deception. No cold commands, no secrets kept that may expose me to ridicule. If you wish me to lie for you, I must know the whole of what I face, should anything arise, any threat to my name or well-being. I expect your protection, not merely your payment." He hesitated, but then nodded, the gravity of her words settling between them. "Agreed." Charlotte rose, smoothing her skirts. She was taller than he had thought, her presence more considerable up close. "Then it seems we have an accord, my lord." He extended his hand, and after a brief pause, she took it. Her grip was firm, almost warm. For a moment, the rain outside faded to a dull patter, and he was aware only of her steady gaze, the faint scent of lavender, the challenge in the set of her jaw. A knock interrupted them. The butler, immaculate and impassive, announced that the carriage was ready. "Shall we?" Sebastian said, releasing her hand. Charlotte nodded, gathering her hat and reticule. As they stepped into the hallway, the hush of the plush carpets and the gleam of polished banisters underscored the strangeness of what they had agreed. Two strangers, each with something to lose, embarking on a lie that would be judged by the sharpest eyes in England. The carriage awaited them in the rain-slicked street, its lamps glowing dimly in the fog. Sebastian handed her in, then followed, settling across from her with a formality that bordered on stiffness. They rode in silence for several streets, the city blurring past. Charlotte watched him, her fingers worrying a loose thread on her glove. "My lord," she said at last, "may I ask, why not choose someone easier, someone more pliable?" He looked surprised, then rueful. "Because my family would see through anything less. They are not fools. And—" he hesitated, searching her face. "You strike me as someone who can keep her head, even when the ground shifts beneath her feet." She smiled, a real one this time, small but bright. "That is a useful skill, especially when one's own has been so often threatened." The carriage turned a corner, slowing as it reached the mews behind the station. Already footmen waited with their trunks, the bustle of departure a reminder that this was not a mere interview, but the threshold of something larger. Sebastian glanced at her, then out the window, his jaw tightening. "When we arrive at Davenham Park, you will be under constant observation. My mother will have 1,000 questions. Araminta will try to catch you out. The servants will judge everything from your accent to your posture. Are you prepared for that?" Charlotte met his gaze, unflinching. "I have stood before creditors and worse. A house full of aristocrats will not frighten me." He allowed himself a rare, genuine smile. "Perhaps I have chosen well, after all." The journey to the country was long and damp, the countryside a blur of green and grey through the rain-spattered windows. They spoke little, but when they did, it was with a kind of wary camaraderie, the sharing of travel biscuits, a brief discussion of the best route to avoid the flooded lanes, a mutual agreement to feign a shared memory of a long-ago ball at Lady Featherstone's should the need arise. As dusk fell, the carriage turned up the long drive to Davenham Park. The house reared out of the mist, all turrets and chimneys and windows agleam with candlelight. Footmen hurried to open the doors, and the sudden burst of warmth and activity was almost overwhelming. Sebastian handed Charlotte down, his touch light but steady on her gloved hand. Inside, the entry hall was a blaze of light and polished wood. The butler announced them, and instantly the assembly turned. The Dowager Marchioness, imposing in violet silk, a slim, golden-haired woman Charlotte recognized at once as Lady Araminta. Her smile sharp as a blade, a cluster of cousins and children and guests, all eyes and whispers. Sebastian drew Charlotte's arm through his voice low but certain. "Remember, you are my choice." She nodded, her heart thudding in her chest. It began then their grand deception. The Dowager descended on them first, her gaze cool as she pressed a kiss to Sebastian's cheek. "You are late," she murmured, then turned to Charlotte. "So this is the mysterious Miss Redmayne. I do hope you have a constitution for country air. We are not so forgiving as London." Charlotte curtsied, her voice steady. "I am honored to be welcomed, Lady Ashcombe." "Honored, are you?" Lady Araminta's voice floated over the heads of the crowd, her fan fluttering. "Oh, do let us have the story of your courtship, Sebastian. We are all dying to know what charmed you so." Sebastian glanced at Charlotte, the faintest plea in his eyes. Charlotte smiled, serene. "It is a terribly dull story, I'm afraid. He rescued me from a dreadful rainstorm, of all things. I thought him most gallant." There was a ripple of laughter, some of it genuine, some not. The tension eased by a fraction. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of introductions and speculation. Charlotte endured the scrutiny with composure, answering questions with wit and a hint of mystery, never revealing more than she chose. Sebastian stayed close, his presence protective, but never possessive. Once, as they passed through the drawing room, he leaned in and murmured, "You are doing splendidly, Miss Redmayne." She allowed herself a small smile. "You may call me Charlotte. if we are to be so very much in love. He bowed his head, amusement flickering in his eyes. Charlotte then, and you must call me Sebastian. Their pact was sealed, not just in words, but in the first glimmer of something like partnership. As the household began to retire, the dowager drew Sebastian aside, her tone brisk but not unkind. She is clever, your Miss Redmayne. I wonder what she wants. Sebastian replied, perhaps only what we all want, a place to belong. The dowager studied him, then nodded. Let us hope she deserves it. Charlotte, watching from the staircase, caught the exchange. She pressed her palm to the banister, steadying herself. She was in. Already the stakes felt higher than coin or comfort. For now, she and Sebastian were allies. Tomorrow, the real test would begin. But tonight, as she closed her door and leaned against it, she allowed herself a single, breathless laugh. For the first time in months, she felt something dangerously like hope. The following morning dawned bright and sharp, the rain swept away by a brisk wind that left Davenham Park gleaming beneath a sky of pale blue. Charlotte woke early, nerves fluttering in her chest as she dressed with deliberate care, choosing a gown of soft grey that set off her eyes and gloves, just mended at the wrist. She studied her reflection, willing herself to look every inch the Marquis's chosen bride. The house was already stirring. Bells chimed in distant corridors, and somewhere below, the sound of laughter rose and fell like the tide. She descended the great staircase to find the entry hall alive with activity. Guests milled about, servants darted with parcels and trays, and the air was heavy with the mingled scents of beeswax and roasting coffee. At the far end, Lady Araminta stood in a circle of admirers, her gown a confection of rose silk, her laughter high and silver bright. The Dowager Marchioness presided from her throne of a chair, issuing instructions with a flick of her wrist. Sebastian was waiting by the doors, his tall frame outlined against the light. When he saw Charlotte, he offered his arm with a formality that was almost tender. "Are you ready for the gauntlet?" he murmured, voice pitched for her alone. She slipped her hand into the crook of his elbow, her touch light but steady. "I have survived worse, my lord," she replied, smiling up at him. "Lead on." The butler flung open the doors, and they stepped into the morning sun, greeted by a chorus of voices and the curious, lingering gazes of half the household. The party would ride out after breakfast, but for now, everyone seemed to be assembled on the steps, exchanging pleasantries and pointed remarks. Lady Araminta approached, fan in hand, her eyes bright with something sharper than welcome. "Sebastian, you must introduce us properly," she said with a smile that never reached her eyes. "We are all agog to meet the woman who has captured your heart so suddenly." There was a beat of silence. Charlotte felt the weight of every gaze, the collective intake of breath. She did not flinch. Sebastian's grip on her arm tightened almost imperceptibly. "Charlotte, may I present Lady Araminta Harrow, an old and dear friend. Araminta, this is Miss Redmayne, my fiancée." Charlotte dropped a graceful curtsy. "It is a pleasure, Lady Harrow." "The pleasure is mine," Araminta replied, her words honeyed but her gaze sharp. "We were all so sure Sebastian would never be caught. Tell me, Miss Redmayne, did you employ some special magic?" There was a ripple of laughter from the onlookers. Charlotte straightened, meeting Araminta's challenge with a tilt of her chin. "Magic is highly overrated, Lady Harrow. I find honesty and good sense far more effective." Araminta's fan dipped, a flicker of annoyance passing over her features. "How refreshing! I do hope you will share your wisdom with the rest of us poor mortals." The Dowager Marchioness beckoned them forward, her eyes shrewd. "Come, let us all go in to breakfast. There will be time for stories enough." Inside, the great dining chamber was ablaze with morning sun. Silver gleamed on white linen, and the long table was already crowded with guests. Sebastian guided Charlotte to her seat at his right, every movement watched by a dozen pairs of eyes. She felt her nerves prickling, but she kept her smile serene. As platters were passed and conversation resumed, Charlotte found herself fielding questions from all sides. Had she known Sebastian long? Was her family in London or the country? Did she ride, play the pianoforte, sketch? She answered with careful truth and occasional misdirection, drawing on the half-invented history they had agreed upon in the carriage. Lady Araminta, seated directly across from her, was relentless. You must forgive me, Miss Redmayne, but I cannot recall ever seeing you in town. Such a pity, we have so few interesting new faces. Charlotte sipped her tea, unruffled. My family kept to a quiet circle in Hampshire, Lady Harrow. I'm only now discovering how lively society can be. A thin, sandy-haired boy at the end of the table. Timothy, Charlotte recalled, watched her with wide, curious eyes. When the other's attention drifted, he piped up, "Do you like riddles, Miss Redmayne?" She smiled, grateful for the reprieve. "Very much. Have you a good one for me?" He nodded solemnly. "What has a heart that doesn't beat?" She pretended to ponder, twirling a strand of hair. "An artichoke, perhaps." Timothy's face lit up. "You're the first to guess it. No one ever does." The dowager's voice cut through, cool and precise. "Timothy, do not badger Miss Redmayne with your nonsense." Charlotte leaned in, her tone gentle. "I like riddles, Lady Ashcombe. They test one's patience and wit, both very useful qualities." A flicker of approval passed over the dowager's face before she masked it with a sip of coffee. As the meal drew on, the conversation shifted. Sebastian spoke little, but when he did, it was always to draw Charlotte in, asking if she would join him for a walk in the gardens, if she preferred riding or driving, if she remembered their supposed first outing together. Each question was a lifeline, a chance to build the illusion of intimacy. At one point, Lady Araminta leaned forward, her voice low and confiding. "Sebastian is a creature of habit, Miss Redmayne. Did you know he cannot bear to have his coffee without a dash of cinnamon? We tried to break him of it at Eton, but alas, some vices are too deeply rooted." Charlotte laughed, light and easy. "Then I shall count myself lucky to have only the cinnamon to contend with. Some men are addicted to far worse." There was another ripple of laughter, this one warmer. For a moment, the scrutiny eased. After breakfast, the guests began to disperse, some to the stables, others to the drawing room or garden. Sebastian offered Charlotte his arm again, and they made their way toward the terrace, the spring air brisk but pleasant. As they stepped into the sunlight, Charlotte let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. That was intense. Sebastian glanced at her, a ghost of a smile on his lips. "You acquitted yourself admirably. Araminta has met her match." She smiled, then sobered. "Do you trust her?" He hesitated. "No. But she is clever, and she enjoys a contest. She will not rest until she uncovers something." Charlotte nodded, her gaze drifting over the manicured lawns. "Then we must give her nothing to find." They strolled in companionable silence, the crunch of gravel underfoot. At the far edge of the terrace, a group of guests lingered near the rose arbors. Lady Araminta was among them, her head bent close to another woman, her laughter carrying on the breeze. Charlotte glanced at Sebastian. "She is very beautiful." He followed her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Yes, but beauty, I have learned, is often the least interesting thing about a person." She looked at him then, surprised by the candor in his voice. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, the world narrowed to just the two of them. A shout broke the moment Timothy, racing across the lawn, a kite trailing behind him. He waved at Charlotte, beaming. "Miss Redmayne, will you help me with this knot? It's all muddled." Sebastian smiled. "Go on. You have won his loyalty by besting his riddle." Charlotte knelt beside Timothy, fingers deftly untangling the string. As she worked, she became aware of eyes on her, Lady Araminta's, sharp with speculation. The dowager's, coolly assessing. Sebastian's, thoughtful and intent. "There you are," she said, handing the kite back. "Now run, and mind the wind doesn't carry you off." Timothy laughed and darted away, the kite soaring behind him. Sebastian approached, hands clasped behind his back. "You do not seem out of place here." Charlotte stood, brushing grass from her skirts. "Appearances can be deceiving, my lord." He looked at her, something softer in his gaze. So can first impressions. They walked back together, the silence between them more companionable now. As they reached the terrace steps, Lady Araminta intercepted them, her smile fixed and bright. "Sebastian, you mustn't monopolize your fiancé. We shall all be quite jealous. Miss Redmayne, will you join us for archery this afternoon? Unless you're afraid of a little competition." Charlotte smiled, matching Araminta's challenge with one of her own. "I never shrink from a contest, Lady Harrow. I look forward to it." The rival's eyes glittered, and for a moment Charlotte sensed the battle lines being drawn. As Sebastian led her inside, he leaned close, voice low. "You handled them all, Charlotte. I confess I begin to wonder who is truly in danger here, myself or you." She glanced up at him, warmth in her eyes. "Perhaps both of us." Inside, the household buzzed with fresh rumors. The guests had seen the Marquis's fiancée, composed, clever, and more than equal to Lady Araminta's games. Whispers swirled a new favorite, a true match, a mystery to be solved. The first skirmish had been fought, and Charlotte had not only survived, but begun to draw allies. By luncheon, it was clear. The game had truly begun. A pale spring sun shone over Davenham Park, gilding the lawns and sending soft light through the windows of the breakfast room. After the morning's chattering meal, the guests scattered, some to the stables, others to the library, a few to stroll the gardens, while the dew still clung to the grass. Charlotte found herself standing just within the great doors, uncertain whether to seek solitude or join the company. It was Sebastian who made the choice for her. He appeared at her side, hat in hand, his expression a mix of invitation and inquiry. "Would you care for a walk, Charlotte?" he asked, his voice pitched low so the servants bustling nearby could not overhear. She glanced at him, then out at the bright gardens. "If you wish it, my lord, I confess I could do with a breath of air before Lady Araminta's archery contest." "Then let us escape while we can," he said, a rare touch of mischief in his smile. They set off along the gravel path that wound through the rose gardens. The scents of turned earth and new green growth mingled in the air. In the distance, two gardeners paused their raking to look up, and a pair of housemaids, arms full of linens, whispered behind gloved hands as the Marquis and his fiancée passed by. Charlotte walked with careful grace, her hands clasped before her. She felt the weight of the household's eyes, servants and guests alike, measuring her every gesture. Yet, with each step, the tension in her shoulders eased. The garden, with its clipped hedges and old stone urns, felt a world apart from the brittle pageantry of the breakfast table. Sebastian let the silence stretch, then said quietly, "You have surprised them all, you know." She looked at him sidelong. "By surviving breakfast, or by not fainting under Lady Araminta's scrutiny?" He smiled, but there was something rueful in it. "Both, perhaps. My family, they are not easily won. I'm not here to win them, only to convince them. There is a difference." Her tone was light, but her fingers twisted a strand of hair around her finger. He watched her for a moment. "You are honest, Charlotte. I find I value that more than I expected." They turned a corner and entered a quieter part of the garden, where the path was shaded by old yews. Here the world seemed hushed, but for birdsong and the crunch of gravel underfoot. Sebastian broke the silence. "It is not too late, you know. If you wish to leave, I would not hold you to your promise. The scrutiny here can be unforgiving." Charlotte stopped, turning to face him. She searched his expression for mockery, but found none. "Why do you ask me this now?" He hesitated, glancing down as he adjusted his gloves. "I had not expected. It is one thing to plan a deception in London, another to see you here, surrounded, under fire. I do not wish to make you unhappy." Her eyes softened. "You did not hire me for happiness, my lord." "No," he said quietly, "but you deserve some measure of it, even here." She did not answer at once. Instead, she looked out over the garden where the daffodils nodded in the breeze. "I am not so easily daunted. Besides, I have a stubborn streak." He laughed, just a breath, but genuine. "So I have observed." They walked on, the mood lighter. As they approached a stone bench beneath an ancient beech, a voice called out, "Miss Redmayne, Marquis!" Timothy came bounding over, his sketchbook tucked under his arm, hair sticking up at odd angles. "Good morning, Timothy," Charlotte greeted him. "Are you drawing the gardens today?" He nodded, eyes wide. "I like the yew trees. They look like giants if you lie on the grass and look up. Would you like to see?" He thrust the sketchbook at her, and she leafed through. His drawings were spirited if untutored winding branches, a pair of swans, a crooked portrait of the dowager with her brooch gleaming. Sebastian glanced over her shoulder, a faint smile on his lips. "You have talent, Timothy," Charlotte said warmly, "especially for noses." Timothy beamed, then turned to Sebastian. May I show Miss Redmayne the yew arch? It's the best place to hide. Sebastian hesitated, then inclined his head. Take care not to get lost. Charlotte and Timothy set off, the boy leading her along a narrow path that twisted between dark evergreen walls. Do you like it here? He asked suddenly, peering up at her. She considered. It is different from anywhere I have been, but it is beautiful and full of surprises. He grinned, pleased. Most guests never find the secret door. Want to see? He darted ahead to a low ivy-hung arch, pushing aside a panel to reveal a hidden alcove with a stone seat. Charlotte ducked in, following. Timothy sat, swinging his feet. Do you think you'll stay? She was taken aback by the question. I suppose that depends. He regarded her with the solemnity only children possess. On what? Charlotte smiled, touched by his candor. On whether I am wanted, perhaps. Timothy studied her, then nodded as if satisfied. I hope you do. You're not like the others. You listen. She squeezed his hand. Thank you, Timothy. Do you have brothers or sisters? He asked, curiosity undimmed. A brother, she said softly. Younger. He is in Hampshire. I hope to see him settled before too long. Timothy brightened. Maybe he can visit. Then you'd have to stay. Charlotte laughed. Perhaps. A shadow fell across the alcove. Lady Araminta stood at the entrance, her rose silk skirts bright among the yews. There you are, Timothy, she said. Her gaze flickered over Charlotte. Miss Redmayne, you will spoil him. He's quite hopeless when indulged. Charlotte rose, brushing leaves from her gloves. I find him perfectly charming. Araminta's lips curled. Charming, perhaps, but he'll lead you astray if you let him. Come, Timothy. Your grandmother is looking for you. Timothy rolled his eyes, but obeyed, sketchbook in hand. As he went, he shot Charlotte a quick conspiratorial grin. Left alone with Araminta, Charlotte steeled herself. I see you are quick to make friends, Araminta said, voice smooth. It is a useful skill. The household is always so eager for novelty. Charlotte met her gaze. I have no wish to supplant anyone, Lady Harrow. Araminta's fan moved lazily. Oh, do not worry. The Marquis is not so easily won as that. He values loyalty above all. And his family, well, they are not as forgiving as you might hope. Charlotte inclined her head. I am quite prepared for that. Araminta's eyes narrowed, but she only smiled. We shall see. The archery contest begins after luncheon. I do hope you will join us. I would not miss it, Charlotte replied, matching her tone. Araminta swept away, leaving Charlotte alone in the dappled green. For a moment, Charlotte let herself breathe, the encounter replaying in her mind. The rivalry was no longer veiled. She had been warned. She made her way back to the main path, where Sebastian waited. He studied her, concern in his eyes. Was Araminta unpleasant? She offered advice, Charlotte said lightly, and a warning. He frowned. She may be persistent, but she cannot harm you not while you are my fiancé. Charlotte looked at him, something unspoken passing between them. Appearances, my lord, are everything here. He offered his arm. Then let us give them something to talk about. She took it, and together they returned toward the house, a little closer, a little more united than before. The household watched from windows and corners, their scrutiny sharper than ever. But Charlotte no longer felt alone. She had found an ally in Timothy, and perhaps, if she dared hope, a friend in Sebastian. As they entered the hall, the dowager's voice carried from the top of the stairs. Miss Redmayne, Lady Araminta, the archery lawn awaits. We will see who is the better shot today. Charlotte glanced at Sebastian, her smile tinged with nerves and anticipation. The test would grow only sharper from here, but for the first time, she felt herself equal to the challenge. The archery lawn behind Davenham Park was a sweep of emerald grass bordered by ancient oaks and the faint, sweet scent of lilac. Sunlight danced on the pale canvas of the competitor's tent, where a table was set with lemonade and sugared cakes. Guests clustered in knots, hats and parasols bright against the green, while servants set out targets in neat white rows. The air was thick with laughter and the low hum of anticipation. Charlotte stood beside Sebastian, who leaned on his walking stick with an air of lazy confidence, though his eyes missed nothing. Lady Araminta, resplendent in a gown of cream and gold, presided at the center of the group, her fan fluttering and her smile wide enough to show perfectly even teeth. "Shall we begin?" Araminta called, her voice carrying over the crowd. "Ladies first, of course. Miss Redmayne, would you care to show us how it is done?" All eyes turned to Charlotte. She squared her shoulders, feeling the scrutiny like sunlight on her skin. "With pleasure," she replied, stepping forward as the footman handed her a bow. She had not touched a bow since childhood, but her father had taught her well in those happier days. She tested the string, ignoring the whisper of silk and the faint, disbelieving titter from Araminta's circle. The first arrow thudded into the target's outer ring, not a triumph, but not an embarrassment either. "Bravely attempted," chirped Mrs. Denley, one of the visiting matrons. Araminta glided forward next, taking her time to adjust her stance, her fan held by an attendant. She loosed her arrow, and it struck nearer the center. A murmur of approval rippled through the gathering. Sebastian, standing just behind Charlotte, leaned in. "You need not win, you know. Only endure." Charlotte glanced up at him, a hint of mischief in her eyes. "Is that what you do, my lord? Endure?" He smiled, a rare and real one. "More often than you'd think." The contest continued in rounds. Charlotte's next arrow flew truer, earning polite applause. Araminta's shots remained precise, though she missed the center by a breath. The game was less about sport than spectacle, every glance and gesture heavy with unspoken stakes. Between turns, Lady Araminta issued invitations for the next day's riding party, her arm through that of the dowager, her gaze always sliding back to Charlotte. "You must join us, Miss Redmayne. We would so love to see your seat on horseback." "I should be delighted," Charlotte replied, careful to keep her voice even. The men's round began, Sebastian taking his place with an economy of movement. He drew the bow, loosed his arrow, and struck the red center. The crowd broke into genuine applause. Charlotte watched as he turned, his eyes seeking hers. He offered a small, self-deprecating bow. "I had good instruction," he murmured, just to her. Lady Araminta's eyes narrowed. "How gallant! Perhaps you should coach Miss Redmayne, Sebastian, or perhaps she is beyond help." Charlotte smiled serenely. "I have always found that improvement comes with practice, Lady Harrow. I'm sure you would agree." Araminta's smile froze, but she said only, "Some things can be mastered. Others, one must simply accept." The last round of the contest was a game of forfeits. An attendant produced a basket filled with slips of paper, each bearing a challenge or a question. The rules were simple: miss the target, draw a forfeit. Lady Araminta missed by a hair's breadth. She reached into the basket, unfolding her slip with a flourish. "Very well," she announced. "I am to recite a poem." Her voice lilted through a few lines of Byron, perfectly enunciated, to the amusement of all. Charlotte's turn came. Her arrow landed just outside the ring. She drew a slip, unfolding it. "I am to tell the story of my most embarrassing moment," she read aloud, hearing the edge in Araminta's laughter. The crowd leaned in, sensing blood in the water. She paused, considering. Then with a smile she began. "When I was 12, I tried to impress my father by climbing onto the roof of our parsonage to rescue a cat. Half the village gathered to watch me coax it down, only to discover I was far more frightened than the cat. It was the vicar's wife who finally climbed up to fetch me, while I clung to the chimney and wept." A ripple of laughter swept the group, some amused, some sympathetic. Even the dowager let out a reluctant chuckle. Charlotte finished. "It taught me that bravery is best measured by one's willingness to admit fear and to accept rescue when it is offered." Sebastian's gaze lingered on her, approval warming his usual reserve. Araminta's fan snapped shut. "How very humble. I do hope you are not so easily stranded these days." Charlotte replied, "Oh, I have learned to ask for help when I need it." A few of the ladies smiled, and the balance of the gathering shifted subtly. Charlotte sensed it, a small but significant victory. The game continued, but the tension eased. By the time the contest ended, Charlotte had earned not only polite applause, but a handful of genuine smiles, even from those who had watched her most closely. She found herself drawn into conversation with Mrs. Denley and a pair of the younger guests who asked about Hampshire and her supposed courtship with Sebastian. Sebastian approached as the group thinned. "You handled that well." She looked up at him, her voice low. "I had little choice." He offered his arm, and she took it, the gesture natural now. "You could have turned the tale against them. Instead, you made them laugh." "Sometimes that is the only way," she said, glancing up at him. He stopped, their faces close. "You do more than survive, Charlotte. You shine." She felt her cheeks warm, and was grateful when Timothy appeared, waving his sketchbook. "Miss Redmayne, I drew you winning the contest." She knelt to see, laughing at the wild sweep of her hair and the exaggerated bow in his drawing. "That is a very flattering likeness, Timothy. You have a gift." He grinned, proud. "Will you come see the ducklings later? They're in the pond by the willow." "I should like that," she promised. Lady Araminta swept past, her gaze lingering on the tableau Charlotte, Sebastian, and Timothy together, all laughing. Her smile was brittle as spun sugar. As the crowd drifted back toward the house, Charlotte found herself walking beside the dowager. The older woman studied her, head tilted. "You are not easily cowed, Miss Redmayne." Charlotte met her gaze. "No, Lady Ashcombe." The dowager's expression softened, just a fraction. "That is well. This house has little patience for the faint-hearted." "I'm learning, my lady." "See that you do." Sebastian caught up, offering Charlotte his arm once more. As they walked toward the house, the sun bright and the air humming with new gossip, Charlotte felt a subtle, public acknowledgement that she belonged, at least for now. Inside, as the footmen began to clear away the remains of the contest, word spread quickly. Miss Redmayne had not only survived Lady Araminta's challenge, but had done so with wit and grace. Even the servants, catching the tale at second hand, began to look at her with something like respect. For the first time since her arrival, Charlotte entered the great hall without feeling the chill of a stranger. She was, for this afternoon at least, a part of the story, a presence to be reckoned with, not merely a curiosity to be tested. The next morning brought a restless brightness, the kind that made every shadow stand out and every conversation seem sharper-edged. Breakfast at Davenham Park was a grander affair than Charlotte was used to, but the formality was more a shield than a comfort. The long table gleamed with silver, the Dowager Marchioness presided with quiet command, and the family and guests gathered as if summoned to a council of war. Charlotte arrived with Sebastian, her hand light on his arm. She wore a gown of pale green, the color of new willow, and tried to move as though she belonged. Murmurs fluttered as they entered, and Sebastian pulled out her chair with such practiced ease that for a moment she almost believed their engagement herself. Lady Araminta, seated opposite, smiled a little too sweetly. "You are radiant this morning, Miss Redmayne. The country air must agree with you." Charlotte smiled serenely. "It does, Lady Harrow, and the company, of course." The dowager signaled for the first course to be served, and platters of eggs, ham, and toasted bread appeared as if by magic. Conversation turned first to the weather, then the day's plans, but soon enough the focus shifted. "Miss Redmayne, I'm curious," the dowager said, her tone deceptively mild. "What do you find most daunting about country life? It can be overwhelming for those accustomed to quieter households." "I think," Charlotte replied, choosing her words carefully, "that every house has its own music, my lady. The challenge is learning the tune." A few of the guests smiled. Araminta tapped her cup with a fingernail. "How poetic! But surely there must be something you miss from Hampshire." "My brother," Charlotte said, her voice softening. "But I am grateful for new company." "Blood is everything," the dowager replied, her gaze lingering. "You must understand, Miss Redmayne, that this family is close. We look after our own." "I should hope so, my lady," Charlotte answered. She felt Sebastian's hand brush lightly across her knuckles under the table, a silent signal of support. Timothy, his face half hidden behind a napkin, spoke up in the pause. "Miss Redmayne is good at riddles, Grandmama. She guessed the artichoke one." Araminta's eyebrow arched. "A rare talent indeed." The dowager allowed herself a faint smile. "We value all talents here." Conversation moved on, but Charlotte was aware of the scrutiny. Each question was a probe, each smile a test. By the end of breakfast, she felt as though she had weathered a small storm. As the guests rose, Charlotte excused herself to the corridor, needing a moment's quiet. The house beyond the breakfast room was a different world. Servants moving briskly, the air scented with beeswax and lavender, a hush beneath the clatter of silver and voices. She was passing the morning room when she heard a muffled sob. Pausing, Charlotte glanced inside and saw a housemaid, her cap askew, dabbing at her eyes with a corner of apron. Charlotte hesitated only a moment before stepping in. "Are you all right?" she asked gently. The girl jumped, startled. "Oh, miss, I'm sorry. I didn't mean—" "There's no harm done," Charlotte said, closing the door behind her. "What is it?" The maid sniffed. "It's just, I was careless with the breakfast tray, and Lady Araminta was so cross. She said I'd never manage a proper house, not even a pigsty, and now I'll be sent away." Charlotte knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Breathe. You made a mistake, but you are not the first, and won't be the last." The girl's eyes filled with tears. "I can't go home, miss. My mother's so ill, and there's no one else." Charlotte's heart twisted. "What is your name?" "Mary, miss." "Well, Mary, I think you are very brave, and I do not think Lady Araminta's opinion is the only one that matters in this house." Mary's mouth trembled, but she managed a watery smile. "Thank you, miss." Charlotte squeezed her shoulder. "If anyone asks, you were helping me with a lost ribbon, and if you need a friend, you know where my room is." The maid nodded, hope flickering in her eyes. Charlotte left her with a kind word, feeling the weight of the encounter. In the corridor, she nearly collided with Sebastian, who had followed her after breakfast. "You vanished," he said, searching her face. "Are you well?" She nodded, then seeing the concern in his eyes, added, "One of the maids was in distress. I did what I could." He studied her, something new and unguarded in his gaze. "You did not have to." "Perhaps not," Charlotte replied quietly, "but I wanted to." They walked together down the corridor. The morning sunlight slanted through stained glass, painting the walls with dabs of color. For a moment, they were alone in the hush of the great house. Sebastian hesitated, then spoke. "You have a way with people, Charlotte. Even my mother seems less daunting when you look at her." Charlotte smiled, a touch of sadness in it. "I have learned to see past the armor people wear." He stopped, turning to her. "Why do you do it? Comfort strangers, weave tales, endure questions." She met his gaze, her own steady. "Because I know what it is to be frightened and alone, and because sometimes kindness is the only weapon I have." He reached for her hand, his grasp warm and steady. "You are remarkable." Charlotte looked away, her cheeks warming. "You hardly know me." "I'm beginning to," he said softly. A door opened further down the hall, and Timothy emerged, waving his sketchbook. "Miss Redmayne, come see. I drew you with the ducklings." Charlotte laughed, letting Sebastian's hand fall. "I promised I would." Sebastian watched her go, a thoughtful expression on his face. Later that afternoon, Charlotte found herself summoned to the dowager's sitting room. Lady Ashcombe sat by the window, her knitting in her lap, the cameo at her throat catching the light. "Miss Redmayne," she said without preamble, "I have heard from Mrs. Davies that you comforted one of the maids this morning." Charlotte tensed, unsure if this was censure or praise. "I did, my lady." She was upset. The dowager's needles clicked. "It is not always wise to meddle in the affairs of the staff." "No, my lady, but I thought it would do no harm." "Perhaps not." There was a pause. Then the dowager looked up, her gaze unexpectedly kind. "It was well done. This house has seen too little gentleness of late." Charlotte inclined her head, relief washing through her. The dowager continued. "You have surprised me, Miss Redmayne. I do not say this often. My son chooses his friends and his fiancées without my counsel, but he has chosen well." Charlotte swallowed, the words meaning more than she could say. "Thank you, Lady Ashcombe." As she left the sitting room, she saw Sebastian waiting at the far end of the corridor. He met her halfway, and for the first time, there was no reserve between them. My mother rarely gives such praise, he said, his voice quiet. You have done more than I ever expected. Charlotte looked up at him, her eyes bright. It was never just a role for me. Not here. They lingered in the corridor, the air between them softer now, charged with something new. For a moment, neither spoke. Charlotte, Sebastian said, "I." But footsteps approached, and the spell was broken. Lady Araminta appeared, her gaze sharp as she took in their closeness. "Am I interrupting?" she asked, her tone all innocence. "Not at all," Charlotte replied, her voice calm. Araminta's eyes lingered, searching. "The drawing room is gathering for cards. I trust you will join us, Sebastian, and Miss Redmayne, of course." Sebastian inclined his head. "We will be there, presently." Araminta swept away, suspicion simmering in her eyes. Charlotte and Sebastian exchanged a glance, understanding passing between them. The house, with all its old loyalties and new suspicions, was beginning to accept Charlotte not as an interloper, but as someone who might truly belong. As they entered the drawing room together, Charlotte knew the risk had grown sharper, but so had the possibility of something real. The afternoon tea was a ritual at Davenham Park, and today it spilled from the golden ivory drawing room onto the terrace, where the spring air was sweet with lilac and mown grass. Charlotte poured herself a cup and perched on the edge of a wrought iron chair, her back straight, eyes tracking the shifting arrangements of guests and family. Lady Araminta presided at the center, all smiles and barbed compliments, while the dowager watched from beneath the shade of a lace-trimmed parasol, her cameo gleaming. Charlotte had already endured 2 rounds of gentle interrogation, one from Mrs. Denley, seeking gossip, and another from a pair of young ladies who wanted to know if Sebastian truly wrote her poetry. She parried both with smiles and innocent evasions, but she could sense the tension mounting, the atmosphere charged with something brittle, as if a storm was waiting to break. Sebastian was late to arrive, detained by estate business, and Charlotte felt the difference keenly. Without his steady presence, she was more exposed, the scrutiny more intense. Still, she managed to keep her composure, answering questions about Hampshire and her supposed love of riding, grateful for every subject that kept the conversation away from her past. It was Lady Araminta who finally pressed the advantage. She set down her cup, her voice sweet as honey. "Miss Redmayne, your accent is so charmingly rural. It must have been dreadfully lonely in Hampshire. Tell us, how did you pass your time with so few visitors?" Charlotte smiled, refusing to rise to the bait. "I read a great deal, Lady Harrow. My father was fond of books, and he encouraged me to borrow freely from his shelves." "Indeed, what a delight. And your mother?" "She died when I was very young." A hush fell, the company shifting uneasily. Araminta, undeterred, pressed on. "And your brother remains in Hampshire, I believe. It must be quite the change to find yourself mistress of Davenham Park, at least in prospect." Before Charlotte could reply, Mrs. Denley, eager for amusement, chimed in. "Did you not attend Miss Redmayne's school, Araminta? Perhaps you recall some mutual acquaintance." Araminta's eyes glinted. "No, I do not believe so. Miss Redmayne, where were you educated?" Charlotte paused, glancing down at her teacup. "At home, mostly. My father was a clergyman, and he preferred to teach me himself." The dowager interjected, her tone cool. "A most respectable arrangement for a gentleman's daughter." But the seed had been planted. The company exchanged glances, and Charlotte felt the subtle shift, a new, sharper curiosity. Tea was just concluding when a footman approached, bowing low. "A letter for Miss Redmayne, from Hampshire." He offered her the missive, its seal broken as if it had already been opened. Charlotte's heart thudded. She recognized her brother's hand, but the writing was smudged, the address oddly blurred. She tucked it into her reticule, determined not to open it under so many eyes. Lady Araminta's gaze lingered on the letter, Hampshire again. Your family must miss you terribly. Charlotte smiled, her composure brittle. I hope so. At that moment, Sebastian arrived, apologizing for his tardiness. He took the seat beside Charlotte, his presence steadying her nerves. He glanced at her, concern flickering in his eyes at the tension he sensed. Lady Araminta leaned forward, voice low and confiding. You have missed such a charming scene, Sebastian. Miss Redmayne has been telling us about her rustic childhood. I do hope you are prepared for life in the country, my dear. Sebastian's jaw tightened. Charlotte is prepared for anything, I think. Araminta's smile thinned. She will need to be. I hear the villagers near Hampshire are quite particular about their own. It would be dreadful for any unfortunate stories to follow one into society. There was a subtle, collective intake of breath. Charlotte set her cup down, forcing herself to meet Araminta's gaze. I have nothing to fear from Hampshire, Lady Harrow. My conscience is clear. Araminta's eyes narrowed, but she only inclined her head. How fortunate. The conversation broke, the company dispersing to stroll the terrace or admire the rose beds. Sebastian leaned in, his voice low. What did she mean? Charlotte handed him the letter. It is from my brother, or so it seems, but the seal is broken. Someone read it before I did. Sebastian's face hardened. You are being targeted. She nodded, fingers twisting a strand of hair. Araminta wishes to unsettle me, and she is clever enough to use any means. He took her hand beneath the table, his grip firm. You are not alone in this. Just then, Mrs. Denley approached, her voice pitched to Carrie. Miss Redmayne, would you play us something at the pianoforte? We are quite starved for music. Charlotte hesitated, but Sebastian gave her a reassuring nod. You play beautifully, he said, loud enough for the others to hear. She rose and crossed to the instrument, seating herself as the company gathered, eager for fresh entertainment. Charlotte's hands trembled as she arranged the music, but as she played, the notes steadied her, the familiar patterns of melody and harmony soothing her nerves. Her performance was met with polite applause, but as she returned to her seat, Araminta's voice floated after her. Such a sensitive touch. It must be the Hampshire air. The barb was met with a few tight smiles, but the dowager's voice cut through. Miss Redmayne's music is quite the equal of any lady here. Charlotte glanced at Sebastian, who squeezed her hand beneath the cloth. You are wonderful, he murmured. She managed a grateful smile, but inside she was shaken. The household's curiosity had sharpened into suspicion, her past now a subject of speculation. As the guests drifted away, Charlotte lingered at the edge of the terrace, watching Timothy sketch the ducks by the pond. She felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she had not since arriving. Sebastian joined her, his expression troubled. If anyone dares to spread a word against you, they will answer to me. She looked up at him, her voice soft. It is not only for myself that I fear. My brother is vulnerable too. He reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek. You are under my protection. Let them try. Charlotte's eyes filled with gratitude and something deeper. Thank you, Sebastian. He held her gaze, his own steady and sure. This is no longer a mere arrangement, Charlotte. Not for me. Before she could reply, they were interrupted by the dowager, who summoned them for a private word. As they followed, Charlotte glanced back at Lady Araminta, who watched from the terrace, her expression satisfied and calculating. Inside the drawing room, the dowager fixed Sebastian with a sharp look. There is talk, my son. I trust you will do what is necessary to protect your fiancé's good name. Sebastian's voice was clear. I will defend Charlotte against any slander, from within or without this house. The dowager's gaze softened ever so slightly. See that you do. As Charlotte left the room, she realized that the balance had shifted. She was no longer just defending herself. Sebastian had chosen to stand with her, publicly and without hesitation. The danger to her reputation was real, but now she was not alone in facing it. The lie they shared had become something more, a bond forged in adversity, one the whole house could not help but see. Night fell softly over Davenham Park, drawing a hush over the house broken only by the faint strains of pianoforte from the distant drawing room and the quiet footfalls of servants readying the chambers for sleep. Charlotte found herself unable to rest. The day's events, the searching questions, the letter from Hampshire, Sebastian's unwavering defense circled in her mind like restless birds. She slipped from her room, shawl wrapped close, and followed the glow of lamplight down the corridor, pausing at the library door. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of leather and old paper. Rows of books stood like sentinels in the half-light. And by the hearth, Sebastian sat in a high-backed chair, lost in thought, a small brandy glass untouched at his elbow. He did not hear her at first. She watched as he ran a hand through his hair, the gesture weary and unguarded. She cleared her throat gently. "I hope I am not intruding." He looked up, and for a moment, the mask he wore for the household was entirely gone. "Not at all. I could not sleep." Charlotte hovered by the door, uncertain. "Nor I. It seems the house is restless tonight." He gestured to the chair opposite. "Will you sit?" She did, drawing her shawl tighter. The silence between them was not awkward, but heavy with things unsaid. The fire crackled, casting gold across the carpet. "I wanted to thank you," she said softly, "for what you did this afternoon. I am not accustomed to being defended." Sebastian's lips curved, but the smile was faint. "You should be, Charlotte. You deserve it." She looked away, suddenly shy. "Not everyone would agree. Then not everyone knows you as I do." She glanced at him, surprised. "You hardly know me at all." He turned, facing her, fully now, expression earnest. "I know enough. I know you are braver than you let on, that you are kind, not only to the people who matter, but to those no one else sees. I know you have endured more than you ever let slip, and still you meet the world with laughter." A lump arose in her throat. "You see too much, perhaps. Or perhaps you have simply learned to hide yourself too well." She was quiet, the fire painting her face in flickering light. It is easier sometimes to pretend, to be what people expect, rather than let them see what frightens or shames you. Sebastian leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "What frightens you, Charlotte?" She hesitated, then gave a small, rueful laugh. "That I will always be alone. That nothing I do will be enough to keep those I love safe. That I am only ever a guest in other people's lives." He was silent for a moment. "I know that feeling. I have always been the Marquis, the son, the heir, the one who must not err. I have worn a dozen masks and wondered, at the end of every day, if any of them are truly me." She studied him, struck by the rawness in his voice. "Sometimes I think we are all only pretending." He met her gaze, something unguarded in his eyes. "With you, I do not feel I have to." The words hung between them, fragile and electric. Charlotte's hands trembled in her lap. She changed the subject, but her tone was gentle. "The letter today, it was from my brother. He is well, but there was a note of worry. I fear someone here may have tried to unsettle us both." Sebastian's mouth tightened. "If anyone dares threaten your family, they will answer to me." "It is not your burden, Sebastian." He shook his head. "It is if you are to be my wife, even for a week." She looked at him, a question in her eyes. "Is that all I am to you? A convenience?" He was silent, the firelight catching the lines of fatigue on his face. At last he spoke. "No, you are not a convenience, not any longer." Charlotte's breath caught. The silence pressed closer, the clock on the mantel ticking in the hush. He stood, crossing to the window, staring into the night. "There was a time when I thought I could manage everything. My family, my future, this house. But I cannot manage you, Charlotte. You are unexpected." She rose, joining him at the window. The moon gilded the lawns, the garden paths silver and mysterious. "I never wished to be managed, my lord." He looked down at her, his voice low. "Will you forgive me for what I have asked of you? for putting you in danger, for making you a target. She reached out, her hand closing over his. If I had not come, I would never have known what it is to be seen. He squeezed her hand gently, and for a moment the world outside the window faded. You are seen. You are valued. She smiled, blinking back tears. You make it easier to hope. He drew her close, tentative, as though afraid she might vanish. She rested her head against his shoulder, the rhythm of his breath steadying her own. I am afraid, she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. So am I, he replied. But tonight, it seems less frightening. They stood together, the hush of the library wrapping them in fragile warmth. For the first time, the pretense between them felt thin as silk, something both of them could see through, if only for this moment. A sound from the corridor, a servant passing, perhaps reminded them where they were. Charlotte stepped back, smoothing her shawl, but her eyes were bright. I should go, she said. Sebastian nodded, but his hand lingered over hers. Good night, Charlotte. Good night, Sebastian. She slipped from the library, heart pounding, and made her way to her room. For the first time since her arrival, she did not feel like an imposter. She felt, if only for that quiet, firelit hour, entirely herself. In the library, Sebastian remained by the window, the first light of hope kindling in his heart. Though the world outside still waited with its judgments and dangers, he knew he would face it with her, not alone. The great ballroom at Davenham Park glowed with hundreds of candles, their light reflected in the polished floors and gilt-framed mirrors. Music drifted from the orchestra, tucked beneath a bank of white lilacs, and the guests, lords and ladies, cousins and neighbors, swept across the floor in silk and velvet, laughter and gossip swirling with every turn. Tonight was the culmination of the house party, the Ashcombe ball, and Charlotte's role as the Marquis's fiancée would be on display for all to judge. Charlotte stood just inside the entrance, her gown of pale blue catching the lamplight, her gloved hands tight around her fan. She had faced crowds before, but never with her heart so exposed, never with so much to lose. Sebastian appeared at her side, his presence steady. You look beautiful, he murmured, voice meant for her alone. She smiled, nerves fluttering in her chest. I hope I remember which foot to put forward. He offered his arm, and together they stepped onto the floor. As they began the waltz, Charlotte felt the eyes of the room upon them, the dowager's steady gaze, Timothy's hopeful grin, the servants at the edges, and above all, Lady Araminta, resplendent in sapphire, her attention fixed on every misstep, every slip. After the first dance, the dowager approached, her expression unreadable. You are accomplished, Miss Redmayne. Thank you, Lady Ashcombe, Charlotte replied, searching for any sign of warmth. The dowager's gaze lingered a moment longer before she moved on, giving nothing away. Lady Araminta wasted no time. She swept forward, gathering a knot of guests in her wake. Miss Redmayne, you must allow me to claim Lord Davenham for a dance. It is tradition, after all. Sebastian inclined his head. If my fiancée permits, Lady Harrow. Charlotte smiled, careful and polite. Of course. As Lady Araminta drew Sebastian away, she leaned in, her voice a blade wrapped in silk. You have played your part well, Miss Redmayne, but you should know, truth will out in the end. Charlotte's smile did not falter. I have nothing to hide, Lady Harrow. Araminta's eyes glittered. We shall see. The next dance passed in a blur. Charlotte found herself surrounded by curious guests, their questions sharp beneath the polite surface. She answered as best she could, but unease gnawed at her. As the music shifted, a hush fell, a ripple of anticipation passing through the crowd. Lady Araminta had returned to the center of the floor, her voice ringing out. My friends, it occurs to me we have been remiss in properly celebrating the happy couple. I propose a game one well suited to such an illustrious engagement. Let us see how well the Marquis and his bride-to-be know each other. A murmur swept the room. Charlotte's heart turned cold. The guests formed a circle, Araminta beckoning Charlotte and Sebastian to the center. Now, Miss Redmayne, tell us what is Lord Davenham's favorite book, or perhaps his most cherished childhood memory? Surely a true fiancé would know. Charlotte hesitated, a dozen possible answers flickering through her mind. She glanced at Sebastian, who met her gaze, a silent apology in his eyes. His favorite book is Plutarch's Lives, she said, voice steady, though he pretends to prefer Byron to amuse his mother. And as for his childhood, he once rescued Timothy from falling through the ice at the lake, though he never told anyone, for fear of frightening Lady Ashcombe. A beat of silence. The dowager's lips parted in surprise. Timothy grinned. Sebastian's eyes shone with something fierce and unguarded. Araminta pressed on. How clever. And Lord Davenham, perhaps you can tell us Miss Redmayne's favorite flower? Sebastian did not hesitate. Violets, because they are overlooked, but all the sweeter for it. Charlotte's breath caught. The room was silent, the game forgotten for a heartbeat. Araminta's smile faltered. How touching. She recovered, raising her voice. And yet, I have heard other stories from Hampshire, of a certain clergyman's daughter who... She never finished. Sebastian stepped forward, his voice ringing clear above the crowd. Enough, Lady Harrow. The room stilled. Even the orchestra fell silent. Sebastian turned, his gaze sweeping the assembly. It is true that Charlotte is not of noble birth. She is not the daughter of a great house, nor does she possess a fortune. But she is braver, kinder, and more worthy than any I have known. I will not hear her name questioned not in my house, not by any guest under my roof. A gasp, then a tide of whispers. He faced Charlotte, his voice softer now but caring. I hired you, Charlotte. I asked you to help me win an inheritance. But somewhere along the way, the lie became my only truth. I love you, and I will choose you, even if it costs me everything. The words hung in the air, astonishing and irrevocable. Charlotte's vision blurred. She felt the weight of 100 eyes, the judgment of the family, the danger of everything falling apart. She drew a breath, heart pounding. Sebastian, she said, her voice trembling but clear. You once told me I was brave. Let me prove it now. I love you too, not as a marquis, nor as a bargain, but as the man who saw me when I thought I was invisible. The room was utterly silent. The dowager stood, tears shining in her eyes. Timothy whooped and clapped, breaking the hush. The guests, one by one, followed suit, some shocked, some delighted. Lady Araminta paled, her lips pressed tight, then turned away, defeated. Sebastian took Charlotte's hand, drawing her close. Whatever comes, he whispered, we face it together. The orchestra, sensing the change, struck up a triumphant waltz. Sebastian swept Charlotte into the dance, and this time, there was no pretense, no mask. The circle of onlookers faded into a blur. The only reality was the warmth of his hand, the promise in his eyes. Around them, the world changed. The risk had been made public, the choice irrevocable. For better or worse, their hearts were laid bare for all to see. The morning after the ball dawned with a golden hush, as if the whole estate held its breath. Sunlight filtered through pale curtains, lighting Charlotte's small chamber with gentle warmth. She woke with the memory of the night before echoing in her chest. The circle of faces, the weight of risk, Sebastian's voice ringing out, her own trembling reply. For a moment, she lay still, heart pounding with wonder and disbelief. By the time she dressed and descended, the house was stirring. The air was different now, charged, expectant, but softer somehow. Servants bustled as always, but their glances were less curious, more approving. As Charlotte passed, Mary the housemaid dipped a curtsy, her eyes bright with silent congratulations. Downstairs, she found the family assembled in the morning room. The dowager sat by the window, her hands folded over her lap. Timothy sprawled on the rug, sketchbook in hand, while Sebastian stood by the hearth, his gaze lifting as Charlotte entered. He crossed the room with purpose, offering his hand, not as a lord, but as a man who had chosen and been chosen. Good morning, Charlotte. She took his hand, her voice soft. Good morning, Sebastian. Timothy looked up, grinning. You missed breakfast. Grandmama allowed me 2 slices of toast because you were not here to say otherwise. The dowager's lips curved just faintly. We had much to discuss. Sebastian's mother regarded Charlotte for a long moment, her expression unreadable. At last she spoke. You have caused quite a stir, Miss Redmayne. The household is divided. Some say you are very brave, others that you are very reckless. Charlotte's cheeks colored, but she stood her ground. I was only honest, Lady Ashcombe. The dowager nodded. That is a rare enough quality in this house. Come here, child. Charlotte obeyed, her heart in her throat. The dowager took her hand, her grip surprisingly gentle. Last night, you made the choice. So did my son. I will not pretend I understand it in every particular, but I see in you what I once saw in myself, a woman willing to risk everything for love. The dowager's eyes softened. You have my blessing, Charlotte, and this house, for all its coldness, will be warmer for your presence. Charlotte could only whisper, "Thank you, my lady." Timothy leaped up, nearly toppling his sketchbook. Does this mean there will be a real wedding, and I can carry the ring? Sebastian laughed, the sound rich and unguarded. If Charlotte will have me, there will be a wedding, and you, Timothy, shall carry the ring and any other treasure you wish. Charlotte turned, searching Sebastian's face. Are you certain? She asked, voice trembling. After everything, your inheritance, your family's expectations. He took both her hands in his. I have never been more certain of anything. My inheritance is meaningless without you. I choose you, Charlotte. Not because I must, but because I cannot imagine my life without your courage, your laughter, your kindness. She blinked back tears, her words unsteady with joy. Then I choose you, Sebastian, not as a bargain, not as a lie, but with all my heart. He drew her close, pressing her hands to his lips. The dowager discreetly looked away, but Timothy bounced with delight. Well, that's settled, he declared. Can we have lemon cake at the wedding? Laughter broke the tension. The door opened and Lady Araminta entered, her head high, her eyes shadowed. She paused, taking in the scene, the joined hands, the dowager's gentle approval, Timothy's eager smile. For a long moment, she said nothing. At last, she crossed to Charlotte, her bearing proud, but her voice softer than before. It seems I was wrong about you, Miss Redmayne. Or perhaps I only wished I was. I hope you will be happy here. Charlotte met her gaze, something like understanding passing between them. Thank you, Lady Harrow. I wish you happiness too. Araminta nodded, a ghost of a smile on her lips, before departing with a sweep of her gown. The day passed in a whirl of quiet celebrations. News spread quickly the Marquess was to marry Miss Redmayne, and the house, once wary, now buzzed with approval. In the afternoon, Charlotte found herself surrounded by the younger cousins, all clamoring for a part in the future festivities. Mary, the housemaid, pressed a posy of violets into her hand. Even the old butler, so often severe, offered a curt, "Congratulations, miss," that warmed her heart. It was only as dusk fell that Charlotte found herself alone with Sebastian in the rose garden, the air perfumed and still. He took her hand, guiding her beneath the arch of blooming white roses. I have dreamed of this, he said, his voice quiet. Not the inheritance, not the title, but this walking with you. No mask between us. She smiled, reaching up to trace the line of his cheek. For so long, I thought I must always be someone else to be worthy of affection. But with you, I feel only myself. He drew her close, his arms gentle but sure. You are enough, Charlotte. More than enough. You have made Davenham Park a home again. She rested her head against his shoulder, listening to the steady beat of his heart. For a long moment, all the doubts and fears faded, replaced by the quiet promise of their future. A bell rang in the distance, summoning them to supper, to family, to the next chapter of their lives together. Sebastian pressed a kiss to her brow. Shall we go in, my love? She smiled, her heart full. Yes, together. Hand in hand, they returned to the house, not as Marquess and hired betrothed, but as partners, as equals, as two hearts who had risked everything and found, at last, their truth. The lie that had brought them together was gone, leaving in its place a love that would endure long after the candles had burned low and the music faded. A love that was, and always would be, entirely real.